Welcome to our Gifts of God Sunday talk. So glad to have you with us. And it's been a good week here in Washington. Mostly sunny days, but today it's a little cloudy. But we had a string of bright blue skies for about 5 days in a row. It was glorious. Yeah. Well, today's the Super Bowl. And I don't normally watch the Super Bowl. However, today I will be, and I'll tell you why. Sandra likes keeping up with the gossip magazines, when we're in the airport. She's got her little stack of, People magazine, and not just the really high-end ones, the Vogues and all that, but some of the trashy ones are her favorites, So she's keeping up on all the gossip and all the Hollywood stuff and what's happening. So Taylor Swift has been in the news of late, and she's doing this, or perhaps she's finishing this very long tour called her Eras Tour. And apparently she's really in her power right now. She's 34 years old. She's been doing this for 15 years now. She started really young, got a lot of recognition, and now she's really in her power. And she's doing these concerts in football stadiums and filling them. And not just like one, but maybe 3 shows in a city, like consecutive evenings. So we're talking like hundreds of thousands of people who go to see her, right? Because a football stadium can hold about 100,000 people, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But she's been doing these tours all over the US, and now this last week she was in Japan, so now she's gone international, and she's filling these stadiums with no sweat, And it's interesting because we have this very good friend in Omaha. He was in the Gifts of God last year, David Buxner, and he's a concert promoter, right? He's a producer of concerts, not at that scale, but pretty good size and relatively famous, artists. And so I said to him, I guess Taylor Swift must have a pretty good agent, and whoever that is could probably retire for the rest of their life after this tour. And he said, "Oh no, Taylor Swift just calls up the stadium and tells them what she wants, and that's how she does it." So she doesn't even need an agent or a promoter. She just does it herself. And she's so famous, of course, they'll give her anything she wants, right? So I thought that was interesting. Like, she doesn't even need a promoter like my friend David. And yeah, she just calls them up, tells them what she wants, and they do it. So, okay. So let's backstep a minute. Sandra's looking at her gossip magazines and seeing Taylor Swift is in the news, and even the scuttlebutt now is that Taylor Swift could turn the election, the U.S. presidential election, because she has that big of a following. Like, if she endorsed a candidate, they'd probably win, because all of her followers would, register to vote and get on board. So the Republicans are really, really afraid now of the Taylor Swift factor. So we've been looking at Taylor Swift all week, and of course Sandra said, "Yeah, well, her Eras Tour, they made a movie of that, and it's on it's on Amazon Prime Video, so we could watch that." And all right, so whenever Sandra gets something like that in her mind, that's like it, So even though I wasn't so into it, I said, and plus the fact that it just came out on Amazon. So of course it's not like $3, it's $20, right? So now I'm even a little more stretched, but I said, okay, well, if you really want to watch it. Well, the thing is 3 hours long. It's a video of her whole concert, right? And it's 3 hours long. So we start watching it and it's in a football stadium, of course, right? She's got like 100,000 people in the stands, and it's just, and they're all going crazy. They're all just like awestruck by her and her songs and her presence. So I'm saying, okay, look, don't judge anything. Just watch it and see what you see, and just be a witness. So that's what I did. Well, first of all, she comes out and everybody is just like, over heels, excited and joyful. And she has total command of the audience. Because one thing she's made a point in her delivery is that she connects with the audience. She talks to them. She has conversations. She speaks to the audience as though they're just her good friend and they're just sitting over there and she's here and she's just going to put on this show for them. And they really get the connection. Like, she is a master at making that connection. And she establishes that first before she starts the songs and the show and all that other stuff, She makes that connection with her audience like the premier purpose of her concert. And she's just an absolute master at making that connection. So, excuse me, this was the first thing I noticed, was connection. All right, so then she starts to get into her songs. Oh, and first she explains, well, when I was doing concerts before, the way it would work would be I would work on an album and I would write the songs, and maybe that would take me, a year or 6 months or whatever. And then I would go on tour and I would present that album, right? And I would play most of the songs on that album. Well, I haven't done a tour in a number of years, and everybody was, asking me, well, what next? What next? What next? And so she's done enough albums and she's been out there long enough. She said, well, my next tour, I'm going to call it Eras, ERAS. And it's going to be a 3-hour long concert. And I'm just going to present all the different eras in my my history, from when I first started in whenever it was, 2006 or 2005, whenever it was she started on the road, right? So she's going to present this concert, and it's going to be vignettes of these different eras in her life. And usually it amounted to what man was she with at the time, and how did that relationship end, and what were the lessons learned? So she's used her own life as the subject of her songs. So then these different eras, and so that's how she formulated this tour. All right, so then she starts getting into it, and we're watching it. And it's just, you can't believe the production of these things. The lights, the background, projections, the smoke coming up out of the floor, the sets, the various sets that they have in the background. And all this is happening in the middle of a football stadium, right? They like got the stage, and the stage is like to the 50-yard line, right? It's this huge stage, and they use the whole thing. And then in the background, they have the screens and then the sets, and some of them are quite complicated with buildings and buildings that she walks up and through while she's singing her songs. And then of course she's being filmed. So even though, like, if you're sitting way up in the nosebleed section of the stadium, they're filming her and she's on this huge screen. So you can still see the action big, even though if you were just looking at her, she'd be really tiny, right? But you can see this whole action on the screen. And then all these dancers, like her musicians, not just her musicians that are playing the music, but all these dancers that are with her, and all this stuff choreographed, right? So I'm sure, like other artists, like Beyonce and those guys and Jennifer Lopez, they were kind of the pioneers of this style of giving a concert. However, Taylor Swift has taken that to the next level and integrated all the things that they did and just come up times 10 more than what they were doing, right? So we're watching this, and it's all unfolding, and she's giving these songs. And two things I noticed. One, she's in an absolute state of pure joy. It just, you cannot imagine the joy emanating out of her. It's just like joy times 1,000, right? So that's the one thing I noticed, that she's connecting with her audience, and then she's just doing what she loves to do, which is sing songs and dance and be a performer, right? And she just absolutely loves that connection. And that's what she's doing. She's just emanating pure joy. So then the second thing I noticed was, the production of this is so amazing. It's like modern day opera. It's like even more. Like, I've been to the Metropolitan Opera in New York. So, I mean, if you wanted to judge opera and have a standard in the industry, Metropolitan Opera in New York is kind of the standard in the industry, right? And they have sets that come up out of the floor, and, they have this whole production, and it's quite amazing, and you're just mesmerized. Well, this concert by Taylor Swift is kind of, again, it's like that times 10, and just the production of it. And this is for 3 hours, granted. You got to have a plan for that kind of thing. This doesn't just happen off the cuff, right? It's all choreographed. It's all planned. It's like every second of that show has been plotted out, and it just happens like clockwork, and I'm thinking, wow, it's a genius that could put something like that together. And so we could only take about an hour and a half of it, so we watched about an hour and a half, and then the night after we watched a little bit more. And I was still impressed by the second watching as I was in the first. But I think what I came away from that was that we have to find that sweet spot in ourselves where we're doing what brings us the ultimate joy. And that's what the Course is telling us. God's will for me is perfect happiness. Now, I'm not saying your version of happiness is going to be this big production and involve hundreds, perhaps even thousands of people. Like, I'm sure her staff to put something like that on is just like legion, right? Or you got your people that do the sound, and people that do the sets, and people that do this and that, and then the band, and then all the dancing, and then all the rehearsal. Like we were saying, how does she remember all that stuff and all those moves, and the cues, and where to be on the stage, and it's like just boggles your mind to think how could anyone hold all that in their mind to be able to then reproduce it, right? I'm sure she has prompters backstage who are helping her, but you still have to hold a lot in your mind to produce something for 3 hours that complexity. So we were totally impressed, and I had such a different view of Taylor Swift, and so it was our Taylor Swift week. We watched that, and then before that, there was another video we watched that she made 3 years ago, and this was made during the, I think Trump was just ending his presidency, and she never really got involved with politics, but there was this very conservative woman politician running in Tennessee for Senate, and she didn't agree with some of her, anti-gay and anti-women's rights policies. So for the first time, she came out in the news and endorsed the other guy, right? And the management didn't like her doing that. Her management, her management team didn't like her doing that. But she said, "Well, I have to because I want to be on the right side of history here. I don't want to be standing, in Tennessee for this woman that's represents everything I'm fighting to uplift these young women, So she came out and said that, and endorsed the other guy. So we watched this other video, which was showing that she's got more substance than just, it's my latest boyfriend and how we broke up. That's kind of the common notion of Taylor Swift. Oh, she writes about her boyfriends and then all the trials she has in her love life, and then it ends up they break up, and that's what she writes her songs about. And granted, there are a lot of songs about that. But there's this new depth, I think, that she's coming into, where she's also writes her songs, and she is a good poet. I was looking at the lyrics, and some of the lyrics are very thought-provoking and very deep. And I think that she is on that level, maybe not as deep and as all-pervasive as Bob Dylan, but there are some very much. Judith, we'll get to that later. I'll ask questions later if you don't mind. And so, I was very impressed watching Taylor Swift all week. So this gets me around to the Super Bowl, right? Well, her current boyfriend is, I forget his name, but he's the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're in the Super Bowl today. So Taylor was in Japan a couple days ago doing a couple concerts in Tokyo. And I think yesterday, she's flown like 14 hours or 15 hours from Tokyo to Las Vegas to be at the Super Bowl today. And that's another thing. I don't usually watch the Super Bowl. We don't have television. It's a pain in the butt to try to find it. And finally I said, no, today we're going to watch the Super Bowl. I want to see what happens with Taylor Swift and this guy, and it should be very interesting how they present it, right? Because this guy, this tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, seems like it might be, quote unquote, the one, right? It does feel like that. Like it feels pretty serious, and he's a pretty down-to-earth guy. And I was looking at his profile, and he's done a lot of philanthropy and helping local kids groups in Kansas City, underprivileged kids. So he's got a kind of a gene for service. And he actually he grew up in Cleveland Heights, which is where I went to art school. I went to art school at the Cleveland Institute of Art. and right up the hill was Cleveland Heights, and that's where he's from. So I'm well familiar with that area where he's from. And yeah, so they're getting together, and it might be interesting to see how how that plays out today. So I paid the money for this streaming service, Paramount, that I can get the Super Bowl today. So we're going to watch that later on today. I think it's around 6:30. So this has been my week. It's been kind of watching Taylor Swift week, but for more of the purpose of seeing just what is it in her energy field that is so appealing and so dedicated to her mission and totally on point and just phenomenal, really. I mean, who is it, even in that industry? And I was asking my friend, who's the concert producer, who is it that can just call up a stadium and say, oh yeah, I want it July 6th, and we'll have it for 2 nights, and we guarantee a couple 100,000 people coming, right? It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Even famous bands have to have promoters and all that. So yeah. So I know, Judith, you want to say something, so go ahead.
It's about Taylor Swift. Well, first of all, about 5 months ago, one of her dancers got into a minor car accident with my car, okay? And I don't care about these little dents in my car as long as it runs. And plus, I'm dealing with more things here myself. So I did a portrait of her, a beautiful portrait, and she came to my house and brought me flowers and something, like a little candied pretzels and stuff. And I just wanted everybody to know that Taylor Swift, about a month after that, gave $100,000 she has 3,000 people working for her to set up all that and do all that. And then this lady told me they were going to go on this world tour, and then they went to South America. So you can imagine airplanes filled with all what you described about the production effort in this thing. And also, if anybody wants to see that Eras, it's on YouTube. That people have taken it from far up in they've taken most of it's on YouTube. Just if you look on the YouTube, I just wanted to let people know.
Well, thanks for saying that. So Taylor Swift actually came to your house?
No, her dancer, one of the dancers.
The dancer came. The
dancer that hit my car.
I gotcha. Okay. Well, anyway. So that's the quality of people she has around her. And
she has great people.
Yeah. Well, Amma, the hugging saint, has quite an entourage of people that are around her. And she also, I'm sure there would be thousands of people helping her as well. And also there's millions of dollars in funds that she spends on hospitals and schools and, projects in villages in India that are needed, water systems and so forth. So this use of the resources, I'm sure if you kind of delved into Taylor Swift's, background and what she's using that money for, I'm sure it's going to some pretty amazing things. And so it's impressive. It's impressive. And so that was kind of the theme this week, because we were looking at joy, and because we're coming up on this weekend training, like happiness and longevity, right? So the subject is going to be happiness, and the course would call that pure joy or perfect happiness. So we're kind of getting our whole delivery together for that. And then watching all this stuff about Taylor Swift, it just gave us so much inspiration that you can live a life where you're at the top of your game. And I don't mean that in a competitive way. I mean, with yourself. It's like, you know what you want to do. You know what that thing is that brings you the most joy, and you put everything into that. And it's just a beautiful expression of something in life to see people doing that. And so that's why we were watching it, to be inspired, ourselves. And that this is something we ourselves want to do in our life. Like, what is it that we love to do? What is it that we can put out there and keep doing it and changing people's consciousness? Because that's what Taylor Swift's doing. She's changing people's consciousness. And yeah, you might say, well, it's with popular love songs and all this. But willy-nilly, when you are in the presence of that happening, that concert, there's something that takes place in you. It's like you let go of some limitation in yourself, and you see the possibilities of something else, right? So I'm sure the word impossible does not exist in Taylor Swift's vocabulary. And that's interesting because my teacher Tara Singh had this story, and he was a young man in India. He had been partially raised in Panama and partially raised in India. So he was kind of a child of the West and the East. And he's a young man. He's back in India, right? This is after India gained their independence. And so he's back in India, and he's riding on a train. And he sees on the train, there's this Sikh leader. He would be like the top Sikh leader in the country, who's on the prime minister's cabinet, right? So this Sikh leader, Gyani Ji Kartar Singh, was on the train, sitting like a couple seats away. It'd be like us, some famous politician sitting right next to us, right, on the train. So he's riding on the train, and he sees this Kartar Singh, and he has a lot of regard for this man already, right? He's a selfless man. He's in the new government that's establishing the independence of India. So it's the first Indian government that's formulating the constitution and everything. And he has all this regard for this man. So he gets up the courage to go sit by him. And he had questions. Because at that point, he felt that India needed to industrialize. And a lot of the high people in India felt the same, that they needed to catch up with the rest of the Western world and start to industrialize and build better roads and, get the people into a kind of a workforce, et cetera. Because India, for centuries, had been, of course, we all know it as this kind of the spiritual mecca of the planet, right? And that tradition of yogis and sadhus and holy men and holy women, that had been going on for thousands of years, right? And that was their jewel in their crown of their culture, and remains so to this day. But what Tara Singh was seeing, having been in the West and the East, was that India needed to catch up and industrialize. And this man, this politician, Gyani Ji Kartar Singh, was also in that mindset that India had to transform. And so Tara Singh went sat right next to him, and he said, well, I wish you'd put your newspaper down because you're making me a little nervous. And so he put the newspaper down and looked at Tara Singh and said, yes, and what is it you would like? And then Tara Singh gave him this whole thing about industrializing India. And the man was like impressed, like Tara Singh had such a passion about this subject. And because he'd been in the West, he knew the differences, the nuances, the differences, how the West had industrialized. This was post-war. He'd been in America post-war, and he was aware of some of these things, And so the guy asked him, the politician, where do you live? And he said, oh, I live in this village, in the Punjab, and blah, blah, blah. And he says, well, day after tomorrow, I'll come and visit you. Well, so Tara Singh never thought that he would do that, like a lot of people say a lot of things and it never happens. But this man actually did. He went to Tara Singh's village to find him and look him up. And at the moment, Tara Singh was not in the house. They all lived in this one big house. And so the guy, Gyani Ji, sent his assistant to knock on the door, and they said, well, where's Tara Singh? And the family was like, oh, wow, this is like, Eleanor Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt coming to your door, right? And here's this leader at their door looking for their son, Tara Singh, who they thought was kind of, like he'd spent his dad's money. He never went to college. He never did anything. And they thought he was going to be a bum and just, kind of a wealthy playboy. And they just thought not that much about him at all. And so now here's this Sikh leader coming to the door saying, where's Tara Singh? I need to talk with Tara Singh. And they're like scratching their head and wow, it's like the most famous Sikh in the country is looking for our son. And then the father said something to him like, well, what is it you see in my son? Because he was curious, because he didn't have that picture of him at all. Here's his son, his only son, that for his whole life tried to avoid going to school and not applying himself to much of anything. And now this leader wants to meet him. And so he asked him, well, what is it you really see in my son? And Gyani Ji took a moment and he sort of thought about it. And he said, with Tara Singh, the word impossible does not apply. The word impossible does not apply. And, it was like his father was like shocked, like to hear somebody say who was at that stature that his son was a genius and that the word impossible did not apply to him. In other words, he could accomplish anything in life he set his mind to, because he didn't have these thoughts of limitation. Oh, I can't do that because of this or that or da-da-da, So the word impossible does not apply to him. So long story short, like Tara Singh wasn't there, and the man said, well, I'll come back tomorrow at the same time. So he did. And that day, Tara Singh was there, and they had the man into their home as an honored guest and blah, blah, blah. And he made the contact with Tara Singh. And then Tara Singh became kind of a protege of him and went with him to the government and met Nehru, who was the prime minister at the time. So this was like his entree into those echelons of Indian leaders. And he got very close to many of those leaders. And even Nehru, he had close relationship with Nehru, and Nehru would give him little projects that he wanted done. So he was operating in those very highest that you could go echelons of Indian government when India first got their independence. It wasn't until a little later when he came to America for good and he met Krishnamurti and then later, much later, Dr. Shukman and so forth. But he was already at those high levels, right? And the point I want to make, the word impossible did not apply to him. He knew he could do anything in the world if he set his mind to it. And he always had this kind of philanthropic gene. So he wanted to do something to serve humanity, something to uplift humanity. And that was always in his energy field. And by the way, when he came to America for good and he lived in New York City, who do you think are the people he met there? He met people like Mrs. Roosevelt, William O. Douglas, who was a Supreme Court justice. You know, he met those kinds of people wherever he went. He was at that level. So I'm watching this thing with Taylor Swift, right? And I'm thinking about this whole thing with Tara Singh, and the word impossible doesn't apply. And I'm saying to myself, wow, this gal, the word impossible does not apply to her. And she could just think it and manifest it. And it just was so uplifting to watch that. So that's been my week, watching Taylor Swift and connecting the dots, right? The word impossible does not apply. And then even with this story about my teacher, Tara Singh. Now, this morning, I'm getting ready for the talk, and I'm in my bathroom, and I have this little pile of books right in there. That's my library. So, all right, on the top of the pile of books is this book I wrote a couple years ago during the pandemic, actually, called The Sanctuary of Silence. And I open up to this page, and it kind of stares me in the face because it's also the theme for next weekend. And it says, the sovereignty of joy. The sovereignty of joy. Well, and then the first little section, and it says, who rules our mind? Who rules our mind, right? The sovereignty of joy is first, and then who rules our mind? Well, I'm in there and I'm thinking about that, and I read a few pages, and that's not really important so much, but I'm thinking about this, who rules our mind? And what is this sovereignty that we have over our mind? Because that's what sovereignty is. It's rulership. If you're the sovereign of the nation, you're the ruler of the nation, right? Or if you're the sovereign of your mind, you're the ruler of your mind. You're totally in charge of that mind. And if you want to believe that things are impossible, or you want to believe that things are impossible, that's up to you. That's totally up to you. You have been given the sovereignty of your own mind. I rule my mind, which I alone must rule. Right? That's 236. Lesson 236. I rule my mind, which I alone must rule. So you have total control over your mind. There's nothing external. There's no person. There's no anything that does not, there's nothing that decides what goes in your mind. You do. You're the gatekeeper of the whole thing. Like, you let in what comes in and you kick out what you don't want, right? That's basically the thing here. You're ruling your mind, and you can have in it whatever you want, and you can put out what you don't want. And that's your sovereignty. And it's also, it's your road to enlightenment. Because you have the sovereignty, there's nothing that happens to you that you haven't already let in somehow. Like if there's something happening and you don't like it and it's painful, it's something you let in your mind that produced that result, right? So you can fix it. You can change your mind. You can let it go. You can forgive it. You can change the thought, whatever. The word impossible does not apply. If you think things are impossible, it's because you let in impossible thoughts. And if that makes you depressed, well, then that's why you're depressed, because you've let in these thoughts that things aren't possible. I can't do it. I'm not good enough. It's just not something that is possible for me. Maybe that's good for Taylor Swift, but my life isn't going to be that, remarkable. All these comparisons, we can fall into them quite easily. And rather than be inspired by someone with that mastery to help us in our own mastery, sometimes we can start comparing and then feeling less than. But that's also, what are you letting in your mind? You have sovereignty over your mind. So then this chapter is called The Sovereignty of Joy, right? So what is it we need to give attention to put ourselves in the joy, that we're certain that's where we are, right? Joy is joy and we're in it. And then that we maintain it. So this is going to be the theme of next weekend. And I'm sure it has something to do with the will. It says God's will for me is perfect happiness. That's 101. God's will for me is perfect happiness. And then 105 says God's peace and joy are mine. It doesn't say God's peace and joy belong to someone else and you have to get it through them. No, it says God's peace and joy are mine. And it doesn't say that, well, God's peace and joy belongs to Taylor Swift, but not to you because you're not that talented. No, it says God's peace and joy are yours. And you can form that however you want to form that into whatever expression you want to express. And nothing is impossible. That's the key. It's like nothing is impossible. The word impossible doesn't apply to Tara Singh. The word impossible doesn't apply to Taylor Swift. The word impossible doesn't apply to Picasso. It just doesn't. And the word impossible, name whatever field you want. The word impossible did not apply to Abraham Lincoln. He says, well, slavery is inherently wrong and we're going to end it. And they did, and he did. So the word impossible didn't apply to him. So I think we have to make contact with that energy. And it is energy. Look at that. I was just looking at the energy pulsing through Taylor Swift, and it was like, wow, that's a different circuit board. That's a different kind of circuitry that can let that much energy flow through her and maintain it, and maintain it over a 3-hour period. And it just was phenomenal. I mean, I was thinking, gosh, you'd almost have to be an Olympic athlete just to do what she does on the stage for that long of a time and not collapse after halfway through. I couldn't get through 2 of those songs without collapsing. But she must have to work out and keep her body in really excellent shape. And yeah, it's no accident she's with a football player who has to do the same. So that's what I wanted to share today about joy and the sovereignty of joy, and that we rule our mind, which we alone must rule. And then we can use that mind however we want to use it. God's will for us is perfect happiness, but then the next one, it says, I share God's will for me for happiness. I share it. We keep harping on this line, nothing real can be increased except by sharing it. But it's stated in many different ways in the Course. Like, if you share it, you increase it, right? I share God's will for happiness for me. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, so you have the happiness. You can't know you have it until you give it away. And that was another lesson we did in the text where it says, to have, give all to all, give it all away. If you want to really have it, give it all away. And then to have peace, that's what you want to teach. You want to give away peace. You don't want to give away anger, resentment, all that other stuff that you could just as easily give away. No, you want to give away peace, and you want to teach that to learn it. And then be vigilant only for that. Like, be vigilant only for God and his kingdom. Well, okay, so how many of us are so vigilant that the only thoughts we allow in our mind, the sovereignty of our mind, are joyful thoughts? Because, or if we're noticing they're not joyful, we immediately process them. And, that was what I was noticing about Taylor Swift when she was composing her songs. These thoughts would come in, right? Like, oh, old boyfriend did this, wasn't that? But she'd process it immediately. It would become part of the song, and then she'd get to the other side of it. Somehow she would transcend it. And then that song was about the transcendence of that thing that went off, right? So that's why people love her, because she's out there bumping around in these relationships just like everybody that aren't working, just like everybody. And then she writes about them, and then she transcends them. And then everybody's like, so wow, oh, she got over that guy in a hurry. I can get over my failed love in a hurry, So they're very inspiring and very useful. And so it was great to see that. But she is sharing her joy. She is one, maybe she's never even heard of the Course in Miracles, but her life is enacting it, Like they once asked Tara Singh, do you think anybody's bringing the Course in Miracles into application? Or no, maybe it was Dr. Shukman they asked, or Tara Singh asked her. And she said, well, maybe Mother Teresa, maybe. And then at some point, Tara Singh actually met Mother Teresa and gave her a copy of the Course. They had a chat. And then he inspired us to work in her missions for a number of years, which I did. It was very useful. But anyhow, the sharing is the point I'm trying to make. It's like, okay, you find that inner joy. You're the sovereignty of your own joy. And then you're responsible for finding that in yourself, whatever that is. And it's going to be unique to you. Might be, Monique playing the clarinet or working in a bakery or whatever it is. And that's going to be her joy. And she's going to extend that, and it's going to increase her joy, right? Because the more she gives it away, the higher she gets in the joy. Well, everybody's going to have their unique thing. And, it's amazing to watch these people that find it really early. Like Taylor Swift knew she was going to be a singer, a guitar player when she was like 10 years old, right? found it really early and just stuck with that and just perfected it, brought more joy, and just look at where she is now, 20 years later. She's just like at the top of her mission, and it is a mission. And it's kind of like an angelic force, like even some of her more naughty songs, there's something really angelic about it, It's like you can't look at her and not hear those angelic forces, in the delivery. So what is your joy? And what is it you have to give? And are you sharing it? And are you replenishing yourself when you stub your toe? Are you picking yourself back up and saying, okay, I'm not going to go down that route again? And you're claiming back your sovereignty. There's somewhere in the text, I could put my finger on it if I really searched for it, but it's a little prayer, and it was basically, I think it's in the section called Responsibility for Sight. And it's saying everything that happens to you, you ask for, and you received it exactly the way you asked for it. And that's basically the responsibility for your sight, because, it says thought always precedes result. So anything that's happening to you in the external world, you had thought forms that went out first and attracted that, right? It's also kind of pure Esther Hicks, but it was stated in the Course in Miracles long before Esther Hicks kind of got on that. And that's basically what it's saying. Whatever happens to you, you have asked for it, and you have brought that to you with your own thoughts. So if it's something you don't want, you change your thoughts. And it's that simple. But you have to have 100% responsibility, which means you're no longer a victim of anything in the world you see. You're no longer in blame. You've pretty much given up attack thoughts, and you're well versed in the forgiveness that can transmute any negative thought that comes along. So you're very practiced in a well-honed mind that can process those things quickly, right? But then at that point, you see, I'm responsible for everything in my life that happens. Everything. Yeah. And even, you can even ask yourself watching the news, like, well, what in me is contributing to that, right? Right? We had to do a lot of that in the Middle East, because when we were there was when Israel was totally bombing out the Gaza Strip, right? And there we are in Muslim countries, an American, and they're kind of looking at us, oh, well, yeah, you guys are over there trying to commit genocide. And it's our government feeding that, right? And there we are, like, oh, okay, forgive me for being American at this time and place. But yeah, even the news, you have to ask yourself, what is in me that's contributing to that? What is the war inside myself? And this is a new responsibility. It also comes with the sovereignty of your own mind. Because your mind is whole, right? Your mind includes everything. Your mind is no limitations, and nothing is impossible. That's the mind. The mind God gave you, nothing is impossible, and there are no limitations. So if there's something in that energy field you're seeing, your mind is connected to it, and you have to be vigilant only for God and his kingdom, and be able to say, no, I'm not part of that. I don't agree with that. And I think that's where Taylor Swift finally found her voice, you know, because for years she was known as somebody who never commented on anything political, right? And now she's living in Tennessee, in Nashville. We lived there for 8 years. Wonderful place. And now this lady Senate, you know, person running for the Senate who was being backed by Trump was coming out with certain policies that she just thought were horrible. And she stood up and she almost swayed the election. Like something like 30,000 of her followers registered to vote overnight. And the Republicans were very afraid that that was going to sway. And now she's back in the same position, but on a bigger scale, right? Now it's a national scale. And we have this election coming up in November for president. And she could very well sway the influences in that. And so it'll be interesting to watch it. But she found her voice. She found her joy. She found the sovereignty of her mind. And she knows in herself, nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible. And I think that's the greatest lesson when you learn that. When you find the sovereignty of your mind, you find the joy within, you find that sweet spot of who you are and what you're here to do and express. Nothing in the universe can stop that. And that's where we want to be as students of the Course in Miracles. So, God bless you and thank you.